Millionaire Robert Montgomery stood frozen on the edge of his terrace, the chilled morning breeze forgotten as his eyes locked on the scene unfolding below. In the garden of his Connecticut mansion, a black bricklayer, clothes dusted with mortar and hands rough from labor, was gently feeding a young girl with a tenderness that struck Robert like a blade to the heart. The girl was his daughter, Charlotte, 8 years old, blind since the accident 2 years ago, the same accident that had shattered not just her sight, but also whatever fragile bond remained between father and child. Robert, behind the wheel that day, had walked away physically unharmed but emotionally shattered. Since then, he'd buried himself in work, guilt, and silence, keeping Charlotte at a distance and surrounding her with nannies and nurses instead of love. And yet, here she was now smiling, laughing because of a stranger who had entered their lives only recently. "There, little Aie," Marcus Johnson said softly, offering another spoonful of food, his voice warm and steady. "Just one more." Charlotte laughed again, that pure, lilting sound Robert had almost forgotten. She reached out instinctively and touched Marcus's face, her fingers tracing the features with surprising precision. "Tell me more about the colors in the garden, Marcus," she whispered. "I want to see through your eyes." Robert flinched, retreating deeper into the shadows, something twisted inside him: jealousy, shame, a hollow sort of rage. How was it possible that this man, a laborer he'd barely noticed when hiring the garden renovation crew, had connected with Charlotte into short weeks in a way Robert hadn't into agonizing years? Montgomery Construction was one of the most powerful firms in the country, reshaping skylines and building palaces for billionaires. Yet, Robert Montgomery, master of steel and stone, couldn't rebuild the broken bridge between himself and his daughter. The accident had changed everything. One reckless drunk driver, one unseen curve, and Charlotte's world had gone dark forever. Robert had never been the same. Work became his escape. Charlotte, once the center of his world, became a painful reminder of his failure. She lived in the same house, but it might as well have been a different planet. The arrival of Marcus Johnson and his crew should have been just another item on the payroll. Instead, it had upended Robert's fragile shell of detachment. "Mr. Montgomery," came the familiar voice of his housekeeper, Mrs. Peterson, cutting through his dark spiral. "You have a call from Shanghai about the East River project." He nodded without speaking, glancing back once at the garden before disappearing into his office. As he passed the photo of Eleanor, his late wife, Charlotte's mother, he paused. Her serene smile stared back at him. "You would have known what to do," he muttered. "You always did." Later that day, at an investor meeting, Robert found himself distracted. His thoughts kept drifting back to the garden, to Charlotte, to Marcus. That evening, when he returned home, Mrs. Peterson met him at the door with an anxious expression. "Sir," she said, hesitating, "Charlotte's piano teacher called again. That's the third lesson she's missed." "What do you mean?" he asked sharply. "Didn't the nurse take her?" "She refused to go." The housekeeper replied quietly. "She says she hates the piano now that she can't see the keys." Robert felt a new wave of guilt crash over him. Eleanor had been a gifted pianist. Charlotte had inherited that love until her world went dark. And now, it seemed, that joy had dimmed too. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Wandering down to the kitchen for water, he heard voices in the garden. Curious, he stepped quietly toward the back door. Through the moonlit glass, he saw Marcus, seated near the fountain, Charlotte beside him, her head resting gently against his shoulder. "After working hours," she said in a small voice, "my father doesn't love me anymore." Robert's breath caught. "He can't even be in the same room with me." "Don't say that, little one," Marcus replied, his tone firm but kind. "Sometimes adults get lost in their pain, especially when they see someone they love hurting. They don't mean to pull away. They just don't know how else to survive it." "Have you lost someone?" Charlotte asked. A long silence passed. "Yes," Marcus said at last, "my daughter Zoe. She was almost your age." Robert remained motionless, heart thudding. "What happened to her?" Charlotte asked softly. "She had leukemia," Marcus replied, his voice trembling with the memory. "We fought it for 3 years. She was strong, so much stronger than me, but we lost her." There was a pause, And then Marcus spoke again, more quietly now. "But what I learned, Charlotte, is that the time we have with the people we love is too precious to waste. Fear steals that time. But love gives it back." Upstairs in his darkened room, Robert sat alone, crushed beneath the weight of that truth. For 2 years he had justified his absence with thoughts of protecting Charlotte, of giving her space. But in truth, he'd been protecting himself from guilt, from grief, from the unbearable truth of her suffering. And now a man with nothing but calloused hands and a haunted past had done what Robert could not, made his daughter feel seen again. What kind of father abandons his own child in her darkest hour? That question echoed in Robert's soul, and as dawn crept over the mansion, one thing was certain: nothing could stay the same. What Robert didn't yet know was that Marcus Johnson's story was far more complex than anyone realized. He was no ordinary bricklayer. Behind those tired eyes and quiet strength lay truths that, when revealed, would unravel assumptions and rewrite destinies. In the days that followed, Robert found himself unable to let go of what he'd seen and heard. He quietly hired a private investigator, a discreet and elite service his company often used. "I want a full background on Marcus Johnson," he ordered. "Everything, especially about his daughter." And as his eyes drifted back to the garden, where laughter once again danced in the morning light, he had no idea just how deeply that one man and that one secret would reshape everything he believed about love, grief, and what it really means to be a father. Off the monitor in his study, Robert Montgomery watched the garden's security feed. Transfixed, there, beneath the shade of a blooming magnolia, stood Marcus Johnson, calloused hands, worn clothes, and an unshakable calm, gently feeding his daughter Charlotte, the same daughter Robert had barely been able to look at since the accident that stole her sight 2 years ago. "There, little lady, just one more spoonful," Marcus murmured with quiet warmth. Through those cameras, Robert saw something else: patience, kindness, devotion. Day after day, Marcus transformed the garden into a sanctuary of sensation, guiding Charlotte to identify each plant by touch and smell, bringing color into her darkened world with vivid analogies. "This red," Robert heard Marcus explain one afternoon as Charlotte brushed her fingers against a rose, "feels like the sun warming your cheeks on a summer afternoon." That sentence lodged itself in Robert's chest. The image was so precise, so human, so full of a kind of love Robert could hardly remember how to show. 3 days later, a manila envelope arrived, thick with truth. Robert opened it with trembling fingers. The background check was thorough. Marcus Johnson, 42, graduated with honors in civil engineering. Once married to Amelia Johnson, deceased. Cancer, one child Zoe Johnson, also deceased. Leukemia at 7. After those back-to-back losses, he left his career behind. He needed to use his hands to stay sane, the report quoted a friend. He started in gardens, moved into construction. Robert stood frozen. Marcus hadn't always been a bricklayer. He could have been designing entire buildings, managing million-dollar projects. Yet here he was, guiding a blind girl through a garden as though it were his life's calling. How could he still smile after losing everything? That night, for the first time in nearly 2 years, Robert opened the door to Charlotte's room. She was asleep. Cautiously, he sat on the edge of the bed and reached out, brushing her hair back with a shaking hand, their first true contact in what felt like forever. The next morning, Robert did something unexpected. He canceled 3 meetings. When Charlotte came down for breakfast, she stopped in surprise. Her father, in casual clothes, was waiting with a picnic basket. "I thought we could spend the day together, in the garden." Her smile was a sunrise. "Really, Dad, aren't you too busy?" That question crushed him. They wandered the garden, awkward at first, sitting on a bench near where Marcus worked. When Marcus spotted them, he started to walk away until Charlotte's voice stopped. "Him, Marcus," she called, recognizing his footsteps. "Come meet my dad." The 2 men exchanged a long, unreadable look. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. A routine bloomed. Robert began spending time in the garden, not just with Charlotte, but quietly observing Marcus, trying to understand how a man so broken by grief could still pour himself into others so completely. One particularly warm afternoon, Robert approached him. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice cracked. "After everything, how can you be so present for my daughter when I can barely even face her?" Marcus paused, brushing soil from his hands. "When Zoe was dying," he said slowly, "she made me promise something. Daddy, promise you'll keep seeing the colors. I didn't get it then, but I do now." He turned his gaze to Charlotte, seated by the fountain, tracing the petals of a lily with her fingertips. "Your daughter is alive, Mr. Montgomery. She needs you to see her colors, not just her blindness." The words struck like lightning. For 2 years, Robert had been looking at what Charlotte had lost, not at the vibrant, luminous child she still was. Then, a few days later, an unmarked envelope appeared in his office. Inside was a medical file and a single, chilling note. "You need to know the truth about the doctor who treated your daughter." The file was explosive allegations, buried lawsuits, redacted hospital transfers. The same neurologist, Dr. Bennett, who declared Charlotte's blindness permanent, had a history of misdiagnoses, unauthorized treatments, and suspicious cover-ups. One case stood out: Zoe Johnson, misdiagnosed with terminal leukemia. The envelope slipped from Robert's hands. Connections began to form like cracks in glass. The same doctor, the same kind of error, the same man. Marcus now here, in his garden, so close to his daughter. Could it be coincidence? Or was Marcus here for something more calculated? That night, Robert drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, torn between hope and suspicion. What did Marcus really want? Why get so close to Charlotte? And why send that file anonymously? In the following days, Robert buried himself in research, his office turning into a war room. Old photographs, court records, and financial documents covered every inch of his desk. In the center, a photo of Marcus with little Zoe. Same treatments, same doctor, same anomalies. By morning, Robert had seen enough. He called an emergency meeting with his legal team. "I want every detail on Dr. Bennett," he ordered. "Every payment, every lawsuit, every institution that protected him. I want names." That evening, from his window, Robert watched Charlotte and Marcus in the garden again. The trust between them, once a comfort, now unnerved him. His secretary's voice broke through. "Sir, Marcus is online too. He says it's urgent." Robert picked up. "Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said, voice strained, "I need to cancel tomorrow's work. I have a doctor's appointment for Charlotte." The blood drained from Robert's face. "My daughter. Why would you?" There was a pause, a heavy one. "I think we need to talk. In person, tonight, after Charlotte's asleep." That night, the house was too quiet. When Charlotte finally drifted off, Robert found Marcus waiting in his study, a folder already in hand. He didn't waste time. "I believe you've already seen something like this," Marcus began, voice steady but thick with emotion. "I sent that first envelope. I needed to know if you'd start connecting the dots." Robert's jaw clenched. "What exactly is going on, Mr. Johnson?" Marcus opened the folder. "Dr. Bennett isn't just careless. He's dangerous. He's conducting illegal experiments using false diagnoses to feed his research." He took a breath. "My daughter didn't have leukemia. She had a treatable immune disorder. He deliberately misdiagnosed her. And Charlotte," Marcus continued, looking Robert straight in the eye, "is not irreversibly blind. Her condition can be treated. There's a window, but it's closing." Robert staggered back as if struck. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" he demanded. "I tried," Marcus said, a bitter laugh escaping. "But Bennett has shields, powerful ones, lawyers, hospitals, donors, everything buried under settlements and NDA letters. No one listened when it was just me. Now," he stepped forward. "But they'll listen to you." Robert said nothing. The room buzzed with unspoken truths, decades of pain, and the terrifying possibility of redemption. The garden outside was cloaked in shadows, but Charlotte's laughter earlier that day still echoed in Robert's ears, and for the first time, he saw the colors. "I have proof," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. "But I need someone with the power and reach to bring him down." Robert didn't even glance at the folder. His eyes were fixed on Marcus, his voice rising with anger. So that's why you got close to my daughter. To manipulate me, no, Marcus answered, his voice calm but his eyes blazing with conviction. I took a job here because I knew what he'd done. I knew your daughter had once been under his care, but I approached Charlotte because, he faltered, because she reminds me of my Zoe, and because no child should suffer what ours did. Robert stared at him in silence, unsure whether to believe him. His heart was torn between suspicion and the flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. I'm not asking you to believe me, Marcus continued. I'm asking you to believe the evidence. He slid a second folder forward. I reached out to Dr. Elisa Winters, a top expert in ocular neurology. She reviewed Charlotte's medical records. She confirmed it. There is a treatment, but we have to keep this quiet. Bennett can't know we're investigating him, Robert's voice turned sharp. Why not? Because Charlotte isn't the only one. Marcus leaned forward, his voice tightening with emotion. There are other children, and I think Bennett is preparing to start a new phase of his trials. A few years ago, I tried to confront him myself. A week later, Zoe had a sudden complication. 2 days later, she was gone. The room seemed to freeze. The implications of Marcus's words were horrifying. A respected physician, possibly sabotaging treatments, or worse, sacrificing lives to further his research. I need you to take Charlotte to see Dr. Winters tomorrow, Marcus said. She agreed to meet us discreetly, if we can confirm Charlotte's condition. If what you're saying is true, Robert interrupted, a fire rising in his voice. We won't stop there. We'll bring down Bennett and every last person shielding him. That night, they planned. Robert, with his wealth and influence, would summon every tool at his disposal: media allies, private investigators, a fleet of top-tier lawyers. Marcus would provide what Robert could not: years of obsessive research, names of other families, and the puzzle pieces that only someone who had lived the nightmare could assemble. The next day, Robert took Charlotte on what appeared to be a simple family outing, but their destination was Dr. Winters' secluded clinic. The exam was rigorous, methodical, and it shattered everything Robert had once believed. Charlotte's blindness wasn't permanent. The original diagnosis had been flawed, perhaps negligently so, perhaps maliciously. Either way, the result was the same. A future had been stolen. But now, with the truth emerging, it could be reclaimed. As they stepped out of the clinic, Robert gripped Charlotte's small hand with new resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every child misled, mistreated, or silenced. Suspicion had turned into certainty, and certainty had become purpose. To fathers, a grieving black bricklayer and a powerful white billionaire had once stood on opposite sides of life. Now they stood together. Different worlds, same wound, the same fire. What Bennett never suspected was that while he practiced medicine behind closed doors, cloaked in respectability and luxury, a storm had been gathering slowly, quietly, mercilessly. It hit like a hammer in the courtroom. Silence reigned as Dr. Bennett was led away in cuffs. His empire of deception unraveled in hours, built over years, but exposed by the most improbable alliance: Robert Montgomery and Marcus Johnson. This is only the beginning, the prosecutor said gravely. More than 40 children have already been identified. The investigations are far from over. Outside the courthouse, a sea of reporters surged forward. Charlotte, holding both men's hands, stood calmly between them. Her once empty eyes now tracked the movement around her with growing clarity. Mr. Montgomery, a reporter shouted, how did you uncover the fraud? Robert glanced at Marcus, then down at Charlotte. A small smile tugged at his lips. Truth, he said, finds its way through the most unexpected paths. Marcus exchanged a meaningful glance with Robert. Sometimes, he said quietly, we have to lose everything to see what truly matters. 3 months later, a quiet ceremony marked the grand opening of the Zoe Foundation. Built with astonishing speed thanks to Robert's resources, the treatment center had already welcomed 15 children, each previously misdiagnosed by Dr. Bennett. We weren't just looking for justice, Marcus said at the inauguration, his voice steady and resolute. We wanted to transform our pain into something that could save other families. At the heart of the foundation's success was Dr. Winters, now its medical director. She had taken Bennett's controversial research, the very studies he had, hoarded out of greed, and refined them into a protocol that was already saving lives. It was a cruel irony. Had Bennett chosen integrity over profit, his work might have saved Zoe and countless others. Charlotte, whose vision steadily improved, became the living symbol of the Foundation's mission. Her story, one of resilience, hope, and a second chance, inspired parents everywhere to challenge definitive diagnoses and pursue second opinions. Meanwhile, the empire Bennett had built on exploitation and deception collapsed. Lawsuits worth millions targeted the hospitals that had enabled him. His colleagues, once complicit in his schemes, now found themselves facing indictments. The same system that once sheltered his negligence was finally holding him accountable. The experience transformed Robert at his core. The man who had once measured success in profits now saw purpose. In service, Montgomery Construction, once a monument to capitalism, redirected a third of its projects toward children's hospitals and research facilities. Charlotte showed me, he admitted during a rare interview, that having sight doesn't mean you see what really matters. On a quiet afternoon in the Foundation's garden, Robert spotted Marcus watching a group of children playing, tears shining in his eyes. Zoe would be 11 today, Marcus said softly. Robert stood beside him, silent for a beat, then asked, "Do you think we honored her?" Marcus didn't take his eyes off the children. "Justice isn't revenge," he said. "Revenge would have meant stopping at destroying Bennett. Justice is making sure no other family goes through what we did." Robert looked down, the words settling deep into him. "You know what keeps me up at night," he said. "If you hadn't come into our lives, I would have gone on believing my daughter's blindness was untreatable. I would have lived in ignorance, blind in more ways than one. And if it weren't for you," Marcus replied, "I never would have had the reach to expose Bennett. My voice alone wasn't enough." That same week, a new patient arrived. At the Foundation, 7-year-old Emma Wilson, diagnosed with the same condition as Charlotte. Her family had lost hope after being unable to afford private treatment, until they saw a news report about the Zoe Foundation. "There's always a moment," Dr. Winters explained during Emma's first consultation, "when a child begins to truly see. Their eyes start tracking the world around them, and then, all at once, they light up with understanding." A year after Bennett's conviction, the garden of the Zoe Foundation became the scene of a joyful celebration. Charlotte, now with almost full vision, blew out the candles on her birthday cake, surrounded by Emma and other children whose lives had been changed by the center. Robert stood in the background, quietly watching the scene. For the first time, he realized that Charlotte wasn't the only one who had been healed. He had too. Before Marcus entered their lives, Robert had simply existed, hoarding wealth, severing emotional connections, and hiding behind walls of power and privilege. "There's a blindness worse than the kind that takes your sight," he confided to Marcus. "It's the blindness of those who see nothing but money, status, and power." On the main wall of the Foundation hung a simple plaque, in memory of Zoe Johnson, who taught us to see beyond appearances from a shared tragedy. Something extraordinary had grown. An unlikely alliance had formed, one not bound by blood, but by compassion, purpose, and a refusal to let injustice stand. In the end, it wasn't just a story of justice or redemption, it was a story of transformation, of healing, and of a powerful truth. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to understand what truly matters.